Amazing. Hi, everyone. I'm Diana from 1KX. We're a crypto investment firm. And I'm delighted to be joined on stage by arguably 4 of the most exciting projects in the space right now to discuss scaling wars. I'm not totally sure about that choice of wording. But we'll begin by some introductions. So if you could please introduce yourselves and your projects.
For sure. Hey guys, I'm Smokey. I'm one of the co-founders of Berachain. Berachain is an EVM identical L1 powered by proof of liquidity, which allows us to turn liquidity into security and use it to power the applications building on the network, such that the chain rewards its users and applications.
Hey everyone, my name is Namik, part of the founding team here at MegaETH. MegaETH is the first real-time blockchain. By settling on Ethereum, we're able to achieve a level of performance that is really a 0 to 1 for applications. So 100K TPS, 1 millisecond block times.
Hi, my name is Keone, co-founder of Monad Labs. We're building Monad, a really performant EVM equivalent layer 1 that's introducing parallel execution, a high-performance database, and a bunch of other improvements from the ground up to help the EVM scale.
Hi everyone, I'm Sydney. I'm the product lead at Eclipse. We are building Ethereum's first SVM L2. The easiest way to think about it is we are building Solana on ETH.
So let's start by stepping back a bit and thinking now it's been 9 years that we've been trying to scale Ethereum. So what's the argument for scaling EVM chains? Maybe Keone, we could start with you.
Yeah, sure thing. So I think the first thing to keep in mind is that there are incredible network effects from the EVM. There's so many libraries that are built out, so many applications, and if you think about the core premise of blockchain, one of the biggest arguments for blockchain is atomic composability, so being able to compose on top of a rich landscape of applications that have built Lego blocks, like building blocks for DeFi is incredibly powerful, and at the same time, Ethereum is really limited in throughput right now for a variety of reasons, but it's really necessary to rebuild the execution stack from the ground up to massively lower fees within the L1 and ultimately serve many, many more users.
Any other takes on why we're here?
Yeah, so I mean, I would highlight, I think there is a difference between scaling Ethereum and scaling the EVM. I think the value of scaling Ethereum is that Ethereum is the most decentralized settlement layer in the world. So focusing on Ethereum and scaling Ethereum is different than scaling the EVM. But I definitely agree with everything Keone has said around how valuable the EVM is and the network effects around the EVM.
I think it's also very fair to say that the EVM is perhaps, to date, the most battle-tested, piece of infrastructure that we have, right? Berachain itself is EVM identical, but we're not an ETH L2. We're not, ETH in that manner. But I do think that when it comes to the degree of liquidity, the degree of developers, and the degree of users that are already, active and engaging in an EVM adjacent ecosystem, it gives you a pretty rich base to start compounding from.
Yeah, and I can quickly add on to that. When we were first designing our architecture, we were very intent on kind of selecting the best pieces of the modular stack. That's why we ended up going with the Solana virtual machine as the execution environment, Celestia for DA as it's scalable and verifiable, and ultimately we decided that Ethereum was the best fit for settlement because of a lot of the reasons that was mentioned before. It's highly decentralized, it's Lindy, and our validating bridge is on Ethereum, and we're able to inherit a lot of the benefits of L1 security as a result.
I'd actually love to dive in there more, and with the Solana ecosystem being obviously popular and somewhere where we can go for speed, to understand how you think about competing with Solana, if you do. And maybe Sydney, we can start with you, and I'd love to hear more about is it competitive, and how do you view that?
Yeah, so we actually get this question quite a lot, as you can imagine. Why not just use Solana? And I think for us, we fundamentally have different design goals. As in L2, we deeply value verifiability, whereas Solana, it's less of a priority, as Toli had stated in his endgame presentation or keynote at Breakpoint last year. So that's something that we care a lot. And as in L2, there are certain advantages that we uniquely have, right? So the first one being, as in L2, we don't have the same burden of consensus as the L1, and we can fully focus on, or solely focus, excuse me, on the optimizing of the block producer. So that way, we can really up the hardware requirements for our sequencers while keeping re-executing costs relatively low. And that way, we're able to get a lot more performance out of it. And I think there is a world where Eclipse will be cheaper and faster than Solana. However, I do think that we serve different user base at the end of the day. We are more so targeted towards the Ethereum users that really care about ETH as kind of the canonical asset. And I think we're actually complementary, as in Eclipse and Solana, in a lot of ways, in that we obviously benefit from a lot of the research that's being done on the Solana front, and we're looking to contribute research back as well. And we're actively working on open sourcing many parts of our stack.
Yeah, I can go next. I think Solana is awesome. And when I wonder why do I think this, it's because there's experiences on Solana which are unique. Applications that are only possible on Solana. I think that's awesome. I think that's cool. When we look at MegaETH, our focus is something similar, right? How can we facilitate a level of performance that can actually scale to, hopefully millions of users fully on chain, right? And for us, I don't necessarily know if that's competitive with Solana. I think our thesis is there's a level of performance which is fundamentally impossible on the layer 1, and it is possible on the layer 2, given the security frameworks that you have as a layer 2, right? Especially if you settle on Ethereum. So yeah, I mean, our focus is on real-time apps. I think that all of the applications which are built on MegaETH are applications that couldn't exist on Solana, so we're not necessarily competitive in that manner. But I am just a big fan of all of the innovation being done on the layer 1, scaling roadmap. We just don't necessarily think it's sufficient for extremely high perf use cases.
So with scaling, we always have to talk about trade-offs, and I'd love to get your takes on what's worth sacrificing in the name of speed, or is there? How are you addressing that question? Smokey, should we start with you?
Yeah, for sure. I think that when we look at this panel, we are probably the slowest of the bunch, in that Berachain, I think, is very much focused on providing a solid user experience and providing a product-centric experience, but from a different perspective, right? So to answer your question directly, Diana, I think that one should have few trade-offs when it comes to speed, but very carefully chosen ones. I think decentralization is probably the most cop-out and real answer in that case, in that as you have a wider and more distributed validator network, it simply becomes a little bit harder to make that all happen. But I also do believe that there's a happy medium that can exist there. So when we look at something like Berachain, which will be able to support L2s, rollups, et cetera, while we might have a 1-second block time ourselves, we can actually think about how that could support many other things like MegaETH in the future. And in our case, as a chain that uses Comet BFT consensus, we'll still have a validator set of 256 and hopefully growing validators, but our focus isn't necessarily on, I'd say, improving the user experience, the product experience from a speed point of view. I think it's actually improving the user experience from a cold start problem point of view. Because I think it's very easy for us to forget that we can build ivory castles and we can build towers in the sky about the most interesting technology, but if we don't build products that actually users want to get their hands on and access, then it's all kind of useless and moot. And the whole idea of what we're doing at Proof of Liquidity is not necessarily optimizing for speed, but optimizing for actually driving fundamental economic value to applications that are building on the network, such that they don't just have a tech advantage in terms of EVM identicality by building on Berachain, they also have a means of bootstrapping their own liquidity, bootstrapping their own user base, and making it easier to get off the ground and really get that activation energy, which tends to be very difficult as one goes from 0 to 1, building in a relatively niche landscape like Web3 right now, right? So I think that decentralization is the easiest answer there, but it's definitely not a perfect one by any means.
I think that we're all in this space because we value decentralization. We value the implications of decentralization, such as censorship resistance, self-custody, and we value the fact that there doesn't need to be a centralized authority that is administering all balances and has complete control over the state of the world. Instead, there's shared global state with hundreds or thousands of nodes running synchronously, like keeping up with each other and maintaining this shared global state. The implications ultimately are quite far-reaching, but just to mention one specific one, like if you're a small business owner, you could take payments directly on the blockchain just by running a node and validating all of the transactions that are going by and knowing the entire global state. So in order to do that, we actually need better technology that can help make this network much more computationally dense and support many, many, many more users. I think that's the fundamental job for the L1, and you were talking about Solana earlier, so I think Solana has definitely done a good job of showing all of us here in this room what's possible, and it's on us to then take up that mantle and help carry the EVM forward, given the network effects.
Yeah, I think we've made some pretty interesting design decisions, so I can chime in. I think Ethereum is the most decentralized layer 1, and I think that's very powerful. For us, our thesis is, okay, if we have this extremely decentralized settlement layer, why don't we leverage the layer 2 security framework to build the most performant execution environment, right? And those have trade-offs, very, very obviously. So we centralize block production. We have maximally decentralized block validation, but we still are able to centralize block production to achieve this very, very powerful level of performance. And I think the reason we do that is because we're able to effectively settle on Ethereum as opposed to another layer 1, which might not be as decentralized. I think that is the complementary architecture of MegaETH with Ethereum, and it allows us to take such extreme trade-offs in the name of performance because we settle on ETH.
I think all of us, land somewhere on the spectrum of decentralization versus performance. We all have taken a different design approach when it comes to that. For us, I think we're somewhat similar in kind of what Namik has said, in that, as an L2, because we've outsourced kind of the decentralization and inheriting some of the security properties from the L1, we're able to push performance a lot further on the L2. There's obviously trade-offs with that, in that we have a smaller block producer set. However, we are mitigating this in a couple ways. The first one being we're inheriting eventual censorship resistance from the L1 through forced inclusion. Number 2, we are enforcing safety via fraud proofs and by keeping re-execution costs relatively low. And lastly, we are starting with a small decentralized sequencer set, which will enable a larger degree of liveness and censorship resistance as compared to a single sequencer setup.
I have a question for, I guess, both Eclipse and MegaETH, which is, how do you guys reconcile the fact that there's this 7-day fraud window? If you have really high performance, that means in those 7 days, that's a lot of transactions to go by. Like, how do you think about that?
Yeah, I think you make a great point. It's almost like a suffer from success situation if you have so much activity. I think the real answer is it's a waiting game. For us to get to a point where we can migrate away from optimistic architectures and towards zero-knowledge solutions, which aren't 7-day periods.
Yep, same here. We're planning on using risk0 for our ZK fraud proofs. But eventually, obviously, we want to go full ZK and really want to shorten that window to whatever is possible and best for the user.
And a follow-up question on that for MegaETH, even if you're using a high-performance client, does that not get rolled into other EVM rollups? Or how do you think about sustaining your moat as a high-performance chain?
Yeah, I think I understand your question. Let me know if I don't. I think big picture, we're very excited to see architectures like MegaETH pick up because in a world where you have multiple 100K TPS execution environments being filled is a world where everyone is using crypto, and that's like a directional win. I think before we get to that stage, though, we are very big fans of, let's try and have as much in one execution environment as possible, right? I think that the Ethereum roadmap, while we are big fans of, the effective security framework of layer 2s, we don't necessarily think L1s can scale to the extent that is needed. I think that maybe people have gone a bit too far with let's have a quadrillion rollups, let's have app chains left and right, and then you lose stuff like atomic composability, which someone on this panel mentioned. So I think our thesis is, at least in the short term, let's have effectively one mega rollup, right? And that's where we want to see as much performance done. We want to continue to optimize our product to get to a point where we can have more than 100,000 transactions per second, keep working down that path. But who knows, maybe in the future, other people will be able to build their own MegaETH-like products. Who knows?
And keeping on the topic of moats, so in a world of chain abstraction, how do you think about having a moat as a chain? And I'd love to hear from each of you about what you're building and offering for the communities and what's drawing them to each of you. Maybe if Sydney, we can start with you.
Yeah, this is something that I'm actually very passionate about. I'm a firm believer that user friction should not be anyone's moat. So in that regard, Eclipse is very happy to be, both the destination chain and the origin chain. However, I think chain abstraction only makes sense in a world of, infinite chains, which fundamentally goes against our thesis. We believe that in a world where we're able to support app-specific sequencing, local fee markets, high performance, and value redistribution, we're able to kind of support the mass majority of use cases, and maybe there's less reasons for apps to become app chains. And in general, I think there is something to be said about atomic composability, as it was mentioned before. But that's how we think about it.
I think that, one thing that we've seen in this space is that layer ones, if there's the right mentality around community and there's the right level of respect for just the incredible power of community, then it becomes something that the community basically becomes an entity that can carry the mission forward and spread the word of decentralization and drive users to the applications that are built within the layer one. And so for me personally, I'm incredibly grateful to the incredibly passionate Monad community that probably everyone here has heard about just how awesome the Monad community is. It's really just the result of individual community members that are contributing at an incredibly high level and really passionate about the space and really creative, and now are supporting ambitious builders that are trying to bring decentralized apps to life. So I think that when you ask about the moat, I think about a moat as a obviously defensive, concept, whereas I prefer to think more about, going on the offensive. And maybe that's the wrong phrase, but thinking about it in the positive light, which is that the usage of decentralized tech is still very, very limited right now, and all of us here that are in this room are here because we're passionate about the growth of decentralized tech. So I just think that although you could think of community as a big part of the moat, I would prefer to flip it and actually think of community as the incredible opportunity and incredible superpower that can help spread decentralized apps to the rest of the world.
So for us, we're a bit early. So our focus on community is just fantastic apps and really, really cracked builders. So it's Omega, only on Mega. And the whole thesis here is just you have unique applications which are unlocked by our architecture design, namely 1 millisecond block times, and what kind of cool applications can exist, what kind of cool user experiences can be formed. And let's just find the best builders we can and work very closely with those builders to enable them to win, right? So that's more or less the thesis at the moment. And yeah, I mean, I think it all will be figured out in the future if you have good builders.
Yeah, I think I would echo some of Namik's comments here in that in a world of chain abstraction, the way that you actually win is by being the place where all the apps come and build, right? And I think that's downstream of a number of different things. On one hand, it's a little bit of like what Keone mentioned in terms of community, right? Because I think the biggest problem that faces a lot of crypto users today is that there aren't actually that many users. And that everyone who's looking as a builder is often looking for one of two things. Either some way of ensuring that they have distribution, which is perhaps why we've seen so much interesting activity in the Ton and Solana ecosystems where there's active retail bases, or they're trying to find a way to make sure that they can actually get funding, find a way to take their app from 0 to 1 and make it to a point of realism, right? And when I think about that in the context of Berachain, I'd say there's two main ways in which that happened. On one hand, there's the fact that there was a very organic, grassroots community that grew over the span of 3 years when we started as nothing more than an NFT project of a bunch of bears that eventually evolved into, a blockchain and a dude wearing a bear mask on a stage, right? And then what comes along with that was just seeing the community take its own roots, its own sub-factions, its own, sub-cults, if you will, people throwing events without any, input from us. And I think this became most obvious to us in Brussels when, there were 10 different Bera ecosystem events during that week in ETHCC, and the foundation was only behind one of them. So I think when you see those microcosms and those network effects forming, as Keone mentioned, I think that's when things get very interesting. And then solving the liquidity/cold start problem is very much what Berachain is built for. As a builder in Web3, in many cases, you have the product and then you have the token, and they're each their own weird business in its own sense that are not perfectly correlated. So what proof of liquidity really does is it means that for any builder that's building on the chain, simply by virtue of the chain producing more blocks and that inflation existing, that's actually going into applications and users in the ecosystem and decreasing user acquisition cost and making it easier for applications to bootstrap their own user bases, their own liquidity for their tokens, and actually get to a point of usability, which is the other side of UX, right? You can have the fastest chain possible, but if people aren't able to actually buy and sell your token and interact with the product in a meaningful way from a financialized point of view, you end up missing one part of the equation. So I think for us, it's come down to building a really strong organic community and building solutions that make it easier to empower all these applications. Because the chain shouldn't matter at the end of the day. The chain is the base plate, it's the foundation, it should never be the main character. The apps are what matters, and what matters is having the next Uniswap moment, the next Tinder, whatever you want to call it, on the chain that you're building as we see it.
Well, we're all looking forward to seeing the apps that are being built on each of your chains. Thank you guys so much for joining us today, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
All right, thank you guys so much. Diana, thank you for leading that conversation. All really fast.